The boy with the envelope. The marble floors of Lexington Metropolitan Bank gleamed like mirrors, reflecting a polished, perfect image, just like the people inside wanted it. Expensive suits, pearl earrings, quiet voices, confidence soaked the air like perfume. And then there was Malik, 12 years old, hoodie too big, sneakers that squeaked when he walked, a thick white envelope clutched in his hand like it held his dreams, which in a way it did. He stepped through the glass doors alone. The moment he entered, everything slowed. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A few glances were subtle, but most weren't. The front desk clerk, a young woman with carefully curled blonde hair and lashes like butterfly wings, stared at him with a polite but frozen smile. He nodded, trying to match her energy. She didn't nod back. Malik walked with purpose. This was supposed to be a small moment, a growing-up moment. His mom, strict, strong, sharp, had given him the green light to make his very first bank deposit. Birthday money, holiday money, every dime he had earned walking dogs and helping neighbors. It all added up to $683. He was proud of that number. But it wasn't the money that made him proud. It was what it meant. Trust, independence, responsibility. What he didn't know was that he was walking into a lesson far bigger than a deposit slip. He joined the line behind a man in a gray suit. The man glanced over his shoulder. Once, then again. A frown pulled at the corner of his mouth. Malik looked away. He wasn't going to let it get to him. Not today. When it was finally his turn, he stepped up to teller window number 4. Behind it sat a woman with a rigid bun, a blazer that looked like it cost more than his entire wardrobe, and a name tag that read Miss Cartwright. She didn't say hello. Malik smiled politely and set the envelope on the counter. "I'd like to make a deposit," he said, his voice steady. Miss Cartwright stared at him. Then, slowly, her eyes dropped to the envelope. "Whose account?" she asked, monotone. "Mine," he replied, carefully sliding over a small paper slip with the account number written in neat handwriting. "You have ID." Malik hesitated. "No, ma'am. My mom said I didn't need it. It's just a deposit." She didn't move. Her fingers stayed clasped over her keyboard. "Where did you get this money?" He blinked. "My birthday. And I've been saving. I walk dogs in our neighborhood. My mom said it was okay to deposit today." Miss Cartwright still didn't touch the envelope. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Her lips tightened. Behind Malik, someone coughed. And just like that, the warmth he had walked in with vanished. Transition into deeper emotional buildup. "I need to verify the source of these funds," Ms. Cartwright said sharply. Malik's heart skipped. "It's mine. I earned it, and I wrote the account number. I'm not trying to do anything wrong." "I didn't say you were," she said, voice flat. "But we don't process unverified deposits for minors without an ID." I don't have ID," he said, shrinking a little. "But the account is under my name. My mom set it up for me. Please, you can check it." Another teller glanced over from the neighboring window. Ms. Cartwright didn't move. Instead, she picked up her desk phone and pressed a button. "Mr. Simmons to window 4, please. Mr. Simmons, window 4. Malik's stomach twisted. From behind the sleek glass office doors, a tall, broad-shouldered man emerged. Dark tie, darker expression. He walked like he owned the place. Tobias Simmons, senior account manager. He walked up, arms crossed. "What's going on?" "This young man says he's here to make a deposit. No ID. A significant amount of cash," Ms. Cartwright said, clearly louder than she needed to be. Tobias raised an eyebrow. "Significant how?" $683, Malik answered, voice quiet. The man blinked, then chuckled dryly. "That's not significant. But still, no ID." "I have the account number," Malik said again, firmer this time. "My mom gave it to me. She said I could do this myself." Tobias stared at him. Long. Quiet. Then he turned back to Ms. Cartwright. Security. Malik's breath hitched. Security. Young man, Tobias said, we're not saying you did anything wrong. But we have procedures. We need to verify funds before any transactions, especially with unaccompanied minors. Malik looked down at his shoes. Suddenly, the floor felt like ice. Around him, the bank had quieted. A couple near the loan officer's desk was whispering. A woman with a baby on her hip kept glancing over. And then, like a final blow, he heard Ms. Cartwright say it. We may need to ask you to wait outside until a parent or guardian arrives. Malik's face burned. The envelope was still sitting there, untouched, like it didn't belong. Like he didn't belong. But before anyone could say another word, the glass doors to the bank swung open with a gust of warm spring air. Click, click, click. Heels on marble. And a voice, measured, controlled, cutting through the silence like a blade. Excuse me, but can someone explain why my son is being treated like a criminal for trying to make a deposit? Every head turned. Every breath hitched. And the woman striding across the bank floor wasn't just any mother. She was Zaria Morgan, CEO, philanthropist, powerhouse. And though no one in that bank seemed to realize it yet, the new owner of Lexington Metropolitan Bank, the woman behind the power. The sound of her heels on the marble echoed louder than the voices that had just shamed her son. Click, click, click. And with each step Zaria Morgan took, the atmosphere shifted. What had moments ago been smug superiority from the staff turned into an almost paralyzing awareness. She wasn't running. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. That was the thing about real power. It didn't scream. It arrived, quiet and deliberate, and made everyone around it question their own existence. Zaria's tailored navy blue suit hugged her frame like it had been stitched by destiny. Her hair was pulled back, sleek and elegant. Her presence alone was enough to make Ms. Cartwright fidget in her seat, and Tobias Simmons, the so-called senior manager, clear his throat and take an unconscious step backward. But Malik just stood there, eyes wide, heart racing, fingers tightening around the envelope that had suddenly become so heavy. He didn't know what to feel. Relief? Shame? Pride? All he knew was this. He wasn't alone anymore. His mother had walked in, and everything changed. I asked a question. Zaria said again, her voice calm but sharp as glass. Why is my son being treated like he just tried to rob the place? Tobias stepped forward first. Ma'am, Miss Morgan, is it? He extended a hand, his voice suddenly polite. Too polite. We were just following protocol. Your son came in with a large amount of cash and no ID. It raised some concerns. Zaria cut in, not taking his hand. Exactly. Tobias nodded eagerly. We just have to be cautious these days. You understand. Her eyes didn't blink. Her hands didn't fidget. She didn't nod. She just stood there, letting the silence stretch long enough to make Tobias visibly sweat under his collar. I see, she said finally. So, to be clear, he walked in with less than $700, an account number, and the intent to deposit, not withdraw, money, and your response was to call for security. Ms. Cartwright looked like she wanted to disappear behind her monitor. Tobias tried again. Ma'am, did you even check the account? She asked sharply. Ms. Cartwright hesitated, then mumbled, he had no ID, so I couldn't. You didn't even try. Zaria said, now turning fully to face her. He gave you an account number. That's more information than half your adult customers bring in. Did you attempt to verify the number? Did you check the account to see if it matched his name? Silence. Zaria took a step forward. Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened like the edge of a blade. What you did do, she continued, was assume. You assumed because of his age, Because of the hoodie. Because of his skin. That he couldn't possibly have earned that money. That he couldn't possibly belong here. So instead of doing your job, you decided to treat him like a suspect. Miss Cartwright looked like she might cry. But Zaria didn't flinch. This wasn't the time for comfort. This was the time for reckoning. From across the bank, curious eyes peeked over cubicles. A woman in the loan consultation booth stopped mid-sentence. Even the security guard near the doors, previously stone-faced and unmoved, shifted uncomfortably. The atmosphere was electric, embarrassment mixed with fear, and Malik could feel it all. But it wasn't about fear for him. It was about justice. He had been humiliated. Not because of what he did, but because of what they assumed he couldn't be. Zaria turned toward her son. "Malik," she said gently, "give me the envelope." He handed it to her with trembling fingers. She turned back to Ms. Cartwright and slowly, deliberately, slid the envelope across the counter again. "Now," she said, "you will open this. You will process the deposit into Malik's account, the one he gave you earlier, the account under his legal name that I opened for him 2 years ago." Ms. Cartwright hesitated, glancing at Tobias like he might save her. He didn't. Zaria's tone cut through the air once more. "And you will do it with the respect you'd give any other customer. Because I promise you, this is the last transaction you'll ever process at this branch, if I see even a flicker of attitude." That's when Tobias stepped forward again. "Miss Morgan, I understand you're upset, but there's no need to threaten staff. I'm sure we can de-escalate." "De-escalate?" Zaria blinked, almost laughing. "You escalated this the moment you assumed my son didn't belong. I didn't come in to make threats. I came to make changes, starting with your job title." He froze. "You see," she continued, "I'm not just a customer. I'm not just a mom. As of this morning." She reached into her sleek leather handbag and pulled out a folder with documents bearing gold seals and official signatures. "I'm also the new majority shareholder of Lexington Metropolitan Holdings. That includes this branch, which means you work for me now." And just like that, everything shifted. Flashback. A twist revealed. 3 months earlier, Zaria sat in a high-rise office in Midtown. She was already a well-known investor, with stakes in several industries, tech, renewable energy, and a growing real estate empire. But banking, that wasn't part of the plan, until it became necessary. She had grown tired of watching how institutions treated people who didn't look like their definition of wealthy. The system wasn't just flawed, it was designed to exclude. And then, one morning over breakfast, Malik had told her something that stuck. Why do the bankers always talk nicer to the white customers? She hadn't known how to answer him then. But now she had an answer. She would buy the system and fix it from the inside. Back to present. Tobias stood still, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Zaria turned back to Ms. Cartwright. "I'd suggest you complete the transaction now," she said. With shaking hands, Ms. Cartwright typed in the account number. A few seconds passed. Then her eyes widened slightly. She looked at Malik, then back at the screen. Yes. The account is active," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "And it has a verified custodial setup under your name, Miss Morgan." Zaria didn't even nod. "And the funds?" Ms. Cartwright blinked. Yes. The deposit brings the total to." She paused, almost choking on the words. $1.8 million. Gasps. Someone in the back dropped a pen. Malik blinked in shock. He had no idea they had that kind of money. He looked up at his mother, stunned. "I thought it was just a savings account." Zaria gave him a soft smile. "It is, for your future and your legacy. And for moments like this, where people need to be reminded who you are." EPIOGE of Part 2. Transition to Part 3 cliffhanger. With the transaction completed, Ms. Cartwright printed the receipt with trembling fingers and handed it to Malik. He took it without a word. Zaria turned back to Tobias one last time. "You'll be hearing from our HR restructuring team this afternoon. Don't bother cleaning your desk. We'll have someone do that for you." Then, calmly, she placed her hand on Malik's shoulder and guided him toward the exit. Everyone in the bank watched them leave. But what they didn't realize was that this wasn't the end. It was just the start. Because Zaria Morgan wasn't done. Not by a long shot. And the next phase of her plan was going to change banking in this city forever. The power they never expected. The sun had barely risen over the Lexington skyline when the boardroom lights flickered on. 10 leather chairs, a glass table long enough to stretch from truth to denial, and seated at the head, dressed in slate gray and shadowed confidence, was Zaria Morgan. Not just a visitor. Not just a shareholder. She was the woman who had just rewritten the rules of a system that never expected someone like her to be in the room. And today, she was calling every single one of them to account. 2 hours earlier, Malik was still quiet as they ate breakfast. The small cafe they were in smelled of cinnamon, coffee, and quiet disbelief. He stirred his oatmeal, not really hungry, but not wanting to waste it. His mother sat across from him, perfectly composed, scanning through emails on her tablet. He finally spoke. "So, all of that yesterday, that's normal for you?" Zaria looked up. "No," she said gently, "but it's common." Malik frowned. "I didn't know we were rich." Zaria gave a faint smile. "We're not rich. We're resourced. And we use our resources to make change. That's different. But why didn't you tell me about the bank? Or the money in my account?" She put the tablet down. "Because it's not about money, Malik. It's about identity. And I needed you to know who you were before the world found out what you have. That's power, when they can't shake your sense of self." He looked down. "But they made me feel so small." "I know." Her voice didn't waver. "But the fact that you felt it, and still stood your ground, that's what made me proud." She paused. "Today, I want you to come with me. To a meeting. The people who built the walls that made you feel that way. They're going to be sitting at a table. And I want you to see what it looks like when someone like us sits at the head of it." 9:00 a.m. Lexington Holdings, 47th floor boardroom. The members of the executive board filtered in slowly, dressed in navy suits, polished loafers, and controlled smiles. They weren't late. They were measured. Men used to control. Women used to being the only ones who were heard when they spoke. But today, their rhythm was off. The air was different, because Zaria Morgan sat at the head of the table. And beside her sat Malik, his hair neatly brushed, his face calm but curious. They didn't speak at first. Zaria just let them arrive. Let them notice. Let them settle into the discomfort of her presence. She learned something powerful over the years. Let the silence do the talking. When the last seat was filled, she tapped the table once, and the room fell still. "Gentlemen," she said smoothly, "and ladies, thank you for coming." Someone coughed. Another shifted in their chair. One man, Clay Whitman, Chief Operations Officer, leaned forward, lacing his fingers in front of him. "Miss Morgan, we've all heard about the incident at Branch 27. We're very sorry that your son experienced that. I assure you, that does not reflect our values." "Doesn't it?" Zaria asked, arching one brow. Clay flinched, just slightly. Another woman, Lynn Darrow, VP of Consumer Relations, chimed in. "It was clearly an isolated case. We've already opened an internal review." "I'm sure you have," Zaria said. "Just like the one you opened 2 years ago, when a Latina mother was denied a home loan, despite perfect credit, or the one last fall when an elderly black man's mortgage application was lost 3 separate times. I've done my research." The room fell silent again. "You think yesterday was an outlier?" Zaria asked, her tone sharpening. It was a pattern. It was the product of a culture you've nurtured for decades. Quietly, consistently, elegantly. Clay leaned back. "Miss Morgan, we don't control what every employee says." "No," she interrupted, "but you do control what they believe they can get away with." Malik watched silently. He wasn't used to boardrooms. He wasn't used to people who wore pocket squares and spoke in code. But he was used to truth. And this was truth, laid bare. His mother wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. Her facts were louder than any outburst. And the people across the table, they were finally starting to realize who they had underestimated. "I own 62% of this company now," Zaria continued. "That means I set the tone. I set the policy. And I decide who still belongs here." She looked Clay directly in the eye. "You've allowed a culture where a child, my child, was treated like a liability. And instead of asking how that happened, you're sitting here trying to preserve your image." Lynn swallowed. "We're willing to make changes. Of course. Training, perhaps." "Training?" Zaria laughed. "You think I'm here to talk about training?" Her eyes swept across the room. "I'm here to talk about transformation." At that moment, she reached under the table and handed Malik a folder. He opened it slowly, unsure of what it was. Inside were printed pages, bold headers, names, charts. Zaria nodded to him. "Go ahead, baby. Tell them what you learned." Malik glanced around, nervous. But his mother gave him a soft smile. He cleared his throat. "This is a list of over 70 complaints from the last 3 years," he said, "all filed by customers at 10 different branches, all people of color, all dismissed or unresolved." The board members leaned forward. Zaria interjected. "My son compiled that. He's 12. A long, deep silence followed. She leaned back, letting that settle. If a 12-year-old can find the patterns, why couldn't your audit department? No one spoke, because the answer was obvious. They didn't want to. Zaria pressed forward. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "Within 30 days, we will roll out a full third-party equity audit. I'll personally select the team." She ticked off each point with a finger. "Every branch will undergo mandatory restructuring review. The HR department will be evaluated from the top down. And any employee with 3 or more unresolved complaints tied to discrimination, terminated, immediately. And we'll publish these changes, publicly. This bank will be held accountable in the public eye, because if we're going to serve the people, we're going to look like the people we serve." Clay spoke up, panicked. "Miss Morgan, with all due respect, you'll cause a PR disaster." "No," she said, cutting him off. "You already did." Malik sat in awe. His mom hadn't just shown up. She hadn't just defended him. She rebuilt the entire stage they had tried to push him off of. And now, they were listening to her. Because they had no choice. End of Payard 3. Powerful cliffhanger. After the meeting, as the boardroom emptied, Malik looked up at his mother. "Are they really going to change?" Zaria placed her hand on his back. "They don't have a choice." He stared at the glass windows. The city stretched far and wide. "And one day," she added, "you'll be in rooms like this, not because I brought you, but because you earned it. And when that day comes, you won't ask for space. You'll own it." He smiled. Not because she promised him the world, but because she taught him how to shape it with his own hands. The headlines, the heat, and the homecoming. The first headline hit less than 24 hours later. "Black boy denied bank deposit until powerful mother steps in. Turns out she owns the bank." By the end of the day, it wasn't just a headline. It was a movement. The story had caught fire, fueled by disbelief, outrage, pride, and a whole lot of people who were tired of seeing the same story on repeat, only with different names. But this one was different. Because this time, there was proof. There was a face. There was a boy. And there was a mother who didn't just defend him. She dismantled an entire system with a calm voice and a folder full of truth. Monday morning, national news coverage. CNN, SNBC, even talk shows were calling. They all wanted a piece of the story. Not just the bank drama, not just the corporate reckoning, but the deeper story, the emotional story, the kind that made people lean forward in their seats and whisper to themselves. Finally, reporters lined up for statements. Cameras rolled outside Lexington Metropolitan Bank. Protesters showed up at branches across the state, some holding signs, others just standing in silent solidarity. One sign said it all. He belonged there all along. And through it all, Malik watched from the living room, wide-eyed. He sat on the floor, legs crossed, watching himself on TV. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said during a clip from an interview the night before, his voice soft but steady. "I just wanted to put money into my account, but they looked at me like I was a problem." Zaria sat on the couch behind him, silent. Her hand rested on her cheek, her eyes on her son, not the screen. He was changing. Not into someone new, but into the version of himself she always knew was there. Now the world was seeing him too. The online storm. On social media, the story exploded. #HeBelongshare, #BankAMalik, #ZariaMorganEffect. Millions of posts poured in. Some shared their own stories of being profiled at banks and businesses. Others reposted the video of Zaria calmly dismantling the bank staff, calling it a masterclass in grace and power. And others, they attacked. They claimed it was stage, that Zaria had overreacted. That race had nothing to do with it. She didn't respond. Not once. Because some battles weren't fought in the comments section. Some battles were won in boardrooms and classrooms and living rooms. Malik asked her, "Why don't you say something back?" She smiled faintly. "Because silence is power too. Let them talk. Meanwhile, I'll be building." Meanwhile, across town, in the same branch where it all happened, the atmosphere had changed entirely. The teller who had once glared with suspicion had been quietly suspended. Tobias Simmons had been replaced. And for the first time in that bank's history, a black woman now sat behind the branch manager's desk. Maya Brooks, handpicked by Zaria herself. And she wasn't just symbolic. She was strategic. At school, Malik's return. But for Malik, the spotlight came with a price. When he returned to school on Tuesday, everything felt different. He didn't walk in invisible anymore. He walked in like a symbol. People pointed. Some smiled. Some whispered. Some teachers went out of their way to praise him. But not all attention is easy. "You're that bank kid, right? Your mom's like super rich or something. You didn't even get in trouble. I would have gotten suspended for causing a scene." Malik felt a cold hand press on his chest. He wasn't looking for fame. He didn't ask for any of this. He just wanted to prove he could handle responsibility. And now the whole world had an opinion about him. At lunch, he sat alone for the first half. Then a girl he barely knew, Amaya Jackson, quiet, usually kept to herself, walked over and sat down. She didn't say anything at first. She just pulled out her sandwich and started eating. Malik blinked. Hey." She nodded. "I saw the video," she said. "Oh, cool." She took a sip from her juice box. "My brother got followed in a store last month. He's 17. Didn't even say anything. Just grabbed a soda and walked to the counter. But the guy working there, he called security. Said he looked suspicious." Malik didn't know what to say. Amaya didn't look at him. She just stared ahead. "So yeah," she added. "Thanks for not staying quiet." Then she stood up and walked away. And just like that, something shifted. Malik realized it wasn't about him. Not really. It was about everyone who had ever been looked at like they didn't belong. And now, he was their voice. Later that evening, home. Zaria was cooking, something she rarely had time to do. But tonight, she needed the calm. Malik walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. They're still talking about it. I know. They're saying you're going to get rid of half the bank. I'm going to get rid of everyone who thinks you didn't deserve to be there. Malik hesitated. Mom, what if this gets bigger? She looked up. It already is. He nodded slowly. Then, with the courage only children possess, he asked, Can I help? She tilted her head. Help? Yeah. Like, speak. Or write. Or, I don't know. I don't want to just be the kid who got humiliated. I want to be the reason it doesn't happen again. Zaria smiled. Not a small smile. A full, tear-pulling, heart-pounding kind of smile. She walked around the counter and pulled him into a hug. You already are. End of part 4. Emotional cliffhanger. But Malik didn't know the storm was still growing. The next morning, a call came. It wasn't from a bank. It wasn't from a journalist. It was from the mayor's office. And they weren't just calling to thank Zaria. They were calling for Malik. Because something had shifted in the hearts of people watching. They didn't just want to hear from power. They wanted to hear from the boy who reminded them that he always belonged. The speech that shook the city. The voicemail came just after sunrise. Zaria was sitting in her sunroom, coffee steaming in her hand, laptop open, news headlines flashing like wildfire across her screen. Malik was still asleep upstairs, wrapped in a cocoon of blankets, headphones half hanging from his ear, probably dreaming of a world that made more sense than the one he had walked into last week. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. New voicemail. Zaria tapped the screen. Good morning, Ms. Morgan. This is Deirdre Langston from the mayor's office. We've been following the story about your son, Malik. The mayor would like to formally invite him to speak at this weekend's City Youth Leadership Summit as our honorary guest. We believe his voice, and yours, deserve to be heard. Please call us back at your earliest convenience. Zaria didn't move. She didn't sip her coffee. She just stared at the screen, eyes narrowing in thought. This was the moment she had feared and hoped for, all at once. Because giving your child a voice is one thing. But watching the world ask to hear it, that was something else entirely. Later that morning, kitchen table. Speak. Malik blinked, half chewing the spoonful of cereal. Like, with a microphone, on a stage. Zaria nodded slowly, sipping her tea. That's usually how it works. He set the spoon down. No way. Zaria arched a brow. Why not? Because I'm not a speaker. I'm not even on the debate team. I don't know what to say. I'm just a kid. You're not just anything, Malik. That's the whole point. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I didn't ask for all this. I didn't do anything special. No, she said gently. You just told the truth. In a world built on silence, that's special enough. He was quiet for a long time. Then, what if I mess up? She gave him a soft, knowing smile. Then you mess up, and the world keeps spinning. But you'll still have said something that mattered. And that's more than most people ever do. He didn't answer right away. But he didn't say no either. 3 days later, City Hall Auditorium. The stage was larger than he imagined. Rows of folding chairs filled the grand space. Camera crews bustled in the back. Local journalists whispered in the wings. Banners hung from the ceiling that read Future Voices, Present Power. But Malik didn't care about the banners. He cared about the microphone. Standing center stage, alone, staring at it like it was a ticking bomb. He felt like an imposter. His hands were sweating inside the blazer his mother had picked out for him. The one that made him look grown up. The one that didn't feel like him. Breathe, Zaria whispered from the side of the stage. Just breathe. He took a shaky breath. The MC stepped up to the podium. We'd now like to welcome someone who has become a powerful symbol of resilience and truth in our community. Please give a warm welcome to 12-year-old Malik Morgan. Applause. Flashes. A few people stood up, and Malik walked forward. He took the mic. His voice didn't come right away. But then, it did. Hi. I'm Malik. Some of you might know me as the bank kid, the one from the news, the one they thought didn't belong. He paused, looked out over the crowd. No one laughed. No one whispered. They listened. And I didn't come here to be famous, or because I like microphones. I came here because I didn't want to feel small anymore. He cleared his throat. I walked into a bank because my mom said I was ready to make my first deposit. I felt proud, like I mattered. But within minutes, someone decided I didn't. His voice grew steadier. They didn't see me as a customer. They saw me as a problem, like I was trying to steal something. And the only thing I had with me was the money I earned. From walking dogs, from saving birthday cards, from doing what I was taught to do. He looked toward Zariah. She nodded, tears glassing her eyes. I didn't say anything at first, because when people talk to you like that, you start to believe them. You start to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you don't belong. A quiet murmur swept through the crowd. But then my mom walked in, and she didn't yell. She didn't throw anything. She just stood there, calm, strong, and she reminded them, and me, that I had every right to be there. His fingers clutched the sides of the podium. I'm here because there are other kids who feel like I did that day. Small, invisible, like they have to prove they belong in places they already earned a seat in. He took a deep breath. So here's what I want to say. To every grown-up who's listening, stop teaching kids like me that we're suspicious. Start teaching your staff that we're valuable. We're future leaders, future owners, and sometimes even the sons of the women who already own the place. The auditorium went still. Then, an eruption of applause. Some stood, some clapped silently with tears on their cheeks. But everyone knew they weren't clapping for Malik. They were clapping because of him. After the speech, backstage, a woman from the mayor's office approached. Malik, that was phenomenal. Would you consider joining the City Youth Advisory Panel? He blinked. The what? Zariah chuckled behind him. We'll think about it. Another hand reached out. A reporter. Do you think you'd want to go into politics one day? Malik just shook his head. I just want to keep telling the truth. That night, back home, the stars above were crisp, city noise faint in the distance. Malik sat on the porch, knees pulled to his chest. Zariah stepped outside and handed him a mug of warm cocoa. You were incredible, she said. I was terrified, he replied. That's what makes it incredible. He took a sip, then whispered, Mom, what if I can't live up to it? Zariah leaned beside him, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. You already have. They sat in silence for a moment. Then he asked, Do you think they'll listen now? She looked out at the dark. I think they already are. The pushback and the promise. Every movement eventually meets resistance. And for Malik Morgan, the 12-year-old boy who had simply wanted to deposit his savings, that moment came faster than anyone expected. His speech had gone viral. His face had been shared across thousands of screens. He was being hailed as a young icon, a voice for a new generation. But with the spotlight came the shadows, and some people weren't just uncomfortable with his message. They were determined to silence it. 3 days later, the phone call at midnight. Zariah hadn't been sleeping much. Since the summit, her inbox had been flooded. Support, partnership offers, requests for appearances, and more than a few veiled threats hiding behind polite emails. But this call wasn't polite. It was cold, calculated, masked behind a blocked number. She picked it up anyway. Zariah Morgan, she said firmly. A male voice crackled through the line. You've made your point. Time to step back. Let the boy fade out quietly. She froze. Who is this? But the caller didn't answer that. Instead, he added, You've stirred enough. Don't push it further. We know where you live. Click. The line went dead. The next morning, security at the door. Zaria didn't wait. She hired private security, installed new cameras, alerted the authorities. She didn't tell Malik the full details, just that things might be a little tense for a while. He didn't ask questions, but she saw it in his eyes. He knew. Still, he didn't flinch, because fear was nothing new for Malik. He had felt it standing in that bank, holding his envelope. He had felt it staring into the eyes of a teller who had already decided what he was. He had felt it when he stood at a podium, his voice shaking but steady. Fear didn't stop him then, and it wouldn't stop him now. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, in corporate boardrooms across the city, Zaria's name had become a problem. She had exposed something they'd spent decades burying. Not just racism, but comfort with racism. The quiet, clean, hidden kind. The kind that sounded like policy but felt like prejudice. Now, these power players, bank executives, city councilmen, developers, had found their match in a woman who didn't ask for a seat at the table. She bought the table and replaced the chairs. Zaria's boardroom, unapologetically hers. She called a meeting, not to defend herself, but to double down. 10 new faces now sat around her boardroom. Community leaders, educators, former activists turned consultants. Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous, all brilliant, all tired of waiting for invitations. I didn't come here to fix one branch, Zaria said, her voice calm but ironclad. I came here to rebuild the foundation, and I want you to help me do it. They all agreed. And thus began the Belonging Initiative, a radical, city-wide policy overhaul aimed at transforming customer service, hiring practices, loan approvals, community reinvestment, and youth engagement across every Lexington bank branch. But then, the scandal. Just as momentum was rising, came the leak. An anonymous social media post appeared. Breaking. Malik Morgan's family lied. They staged the bank incident for fame. Entire thing was premeditated by his mother to manipulate public sympathy. Attached was a grainy, cropped photo of Zaria walking into the bank. Nothing illegal, just enough to raise questions. Within hours, trolls flooded the internet. Grifters. Race baiters. She used her kid. Privileged pretending to be oppressed. Even mainstream outlets picked it up. Fox News debated it on air. Others called for an investigation into her acquisition of the bank. Zaria knew it wasn't about truth. It was about distraction. They couldn't undo what she'd done. So they tried to make people doubt her reason for doing it. Malik saw it all. He scrolled through the hate in silence. Post after post. Lie after lie. And one comment that hit harder than all the rest. That boy only got to speak because his mom is rich. If he were just another black kid with no money, nobody would care. He stared at the words, and for a moment, he believed them. Until his mother sat beside him. They want you to believe that, she said softly, because they're terrified of what happens if you don't. He looked up. What if they're right? Zaria shook her head. You didn't speak because of who I am. You spoke because of who you are, and because someone else needs to hear it. He was quiet for a long time, then said, I want to speak again. She blinked. Even now, even with all this. Especially now, he said. And in that moment, Zaria knew. Her son wasn't just a symbol. He was a force. 2 days later, a press conference. The mayor had offered Zaria a chance to respond. She declined. But Malik. He accepted, standing at a podium once again, this time before cameras and microphones from national outlets. He looked smaller than the building behind him, but his voice carried more weight than any adult in that crowd. I've heard people say my story was fake, that we made it up, that my mom just wanted attention." He paused. "They're wrong." He took a breath. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to be treated fairly. And if you think that's something people have to earn, then maybe you've never been treated unfairly." Flashbulbs burst. "Yeah, my mom owns a bank now, but when I walked into that branch, nobody knew that. They just saw a black boy with cash, and they made up a story before I could say a word." He leaned forward. "You know what's worse than being judged?" He waited, watching people defend the people who judged you. Silence. Then he added, "I'm not going away. You can post lies. You can twist the story, but you can't unlive what happened. And I won't stop telling the truth, because somebody else needs to know they're not alone." The city moved. The press conference didn't erase the hate, but it overshadowed it. People rallied around Malik again. More youth leaders joined the Belonging Initiative. Local artists painted murals of Malik in downtown districts with the words, "He belongs here." Donations poured into financial literacy programs Zaria launched for Black and brown youth. And the banks. They had no choice but to follow the new rules or lose everything. Because Zaria wasn't the only investor anymore. She had invited the community in. Final scene. At home. Malik stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker. "I think I want to be a writer," he said softly. Zaria looked up from her book. "Oh." He nodded. "People listen to stories, and maybe if we tell enough good ones, the bad ones won't win." Zaria smiled. "That sounds like a plan." He turned to her. "Thanks, Mom." "For what?" "For showing me that the scariest rooms aren't the ones with the loudest people. They're the ones waiting for someone to speak up." She reached over, took his hand, and whispered, "You're not waiting anymore."